Hi, I'm Richard Rogers, and I absolutely hope that you enjoyed today's spiritual message. You know, we at Unity of Phoenix Spiritual Center are committed to helping people live better lives. We're going to provide you tools over and over, spiritual tools that allow you to live your best possible life. And if you want to leave a donation to continue to allow the work that we do to support other people just like you, we say thank you. Thank you for your generosity, because this ministry is committed to making the world a better place.
Okay, so my question for you tonight, you ready for my question? Is how do you choose to live your life? Because sometimes we get so involved in the doing that we forget to ask ourselves how. Do you ever look at your to-do list and think there's so many things that I have to do today, but we never kind of take a step back and ask ourselves the bigger question about how am I going to do this? Not just get it done, but how do I choose to live my life? When you're away from all the noise and busyness, when you're by yourself behind closed doors, seeking your own counsel, how do you choose to live your life? Do you want life to be a wild adventure? Do you want it to be stable and growing? Do you want to feel safe and protected? How we live our life is 100% our right to choose. We may be able to change many things in our life, but the truth is how we choose to live is 100% our responsibility. Our life is a blank slate. The day you were born, there was nothing on it, and it was yours to write. The life you desire, the life you choose to live, who you are as the man or woman you want to be, it's either a bold adventure or it's a life of fear and timidity. And tonight I want us to go there. One of the most favorite speeches that Theodore Roosevelt ever gave was in April 23, 1910. And it was at the Sorbonne in Paris. It was a huge gathering of diplomats, of Army and Navy French officers, a couple thousand students, a couple thousand people were there who had bought tickets. And it's called, it's been known as, his title for it was A Citizen in the Republic. It's become known as the man in the arena. And in this speech, Roosevelt railed against the cynic to look down at men who were trying to make the world a better place. And he said this: the poorest way we face life is to face it with a sneer, a cynical habit of thought and speech, a readiness to criticize work which is the critic himself never tries to perform, an intellectual aloofness which we will not accept the life's realities. All these things mark not a superiority, but a weakness. And then he said this: it is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of the deed could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcomings. But he who actually does strive to do the deed, who knows great enthusiasm, the great devotion, who spends himself into a worthy cause, who at the best knows at the end the triumph of either high achievement or at worst he fails. And at least he will, while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be for those that are cold and timid souls who never know the victory or the defeat. So tonight I begin a 4-week series based on Brene Brown's Rising Strong. And the whole question of this book is, how do we choose to live? And the idea is that in our culture, we put so much energy on results that we don't often notice that life is not always about that. And in a much bigger way, in a much more spiritual way, it's really the way we choose to live. And how do we choose to show up day in and day out? Are we engaged in the process of life, or are we watching it from the sidelines, afraid to play? And in this book, it's the process of inviting us to rise again. How many of you have ever had a failure? Great, right? How many of you in the moment of great failure just thought it would be ideal just to stay down? Right? Like if you really had a knockdown, there's a part of you, if we're honest with ourselves, who just doesn't want to get up. How many of you have ever seen a Rocky movie? Right? You see a Rocky movie, there's always a time when Sylvester Stallone's Rocky is lying on the mat and everything in you is saying, don't get up. Don't get up. Like you're just, I know you're going to win, but you're going to get beat up. Just stay down. And yet when you watch him get up, there's something in your soul that knows that you have no choice. That you have to get up. And that no matter how many times you get knocked down by life, you have to get up. Because it is in the getting up that we find our true strength. It's in the getting up over and over again that we discover how much God is in us. So tonight I want to begin with the first chapter. Because in the first chapter, she gives us the rules of engagement. Now, in a military situation, the rules of engagement are those rules that kind of define, they define what military actions they're allowed to take and what they're not, how much force they can use, what is approved and what is not approved. So here we are, Brene Brown, first chapter. I want to be in the arena. I want to be brave with my life. And when we make the choice to dare greatly, we sign up, and this is a word that is in the New Testament, but it's not often a word I use on a Wednesday night or a Sunday morning. We sign up to get our asses kicked. It is in the Bible, Genesis 13 something, but not that I've counted. Right? We sign up to get our rear ends kicked. We can choose courage or we can choose comfort. But we can't have both, not at the same time. Vulnerability is not winning or losing. It is having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. Vulnerability is not weakness. It is our greatest courage. A lot of cheap seats in the arena are filled with people who never venture onto the floor. They just hurl them mean-spirited criticism and put-downs from a safe distance. The problem is that when you stop caring what people think and stop feeling hurt by the cruelty, we lose our ability to connect. But when we defined by the people what the people think and say, we lose our courage to be vulnerable. Therefore, we need to be selective about the feedback we let into our lives. For me, if you're not in the arena, if you're not on the floor, in the fight, I'm not interested in your feedback. Isn't that great? Right? Because what I want you to see, right, is for many of us, right? For many of us, the moment we get knocked down, there's a timidity that happens to us. There's a safety that we want to begin to play in. There's a sense of, I don't want that to happen, so how small do I have to live never to be hurt again? And the problem is, your soul didn't come into the world to be small. It didn't come into the world to contract. Your soul came into the world to expand, and in the presence of being knocked down, now I don't expect you to jump up and say thank you. But I want you to look at the times and the places where you've been knocked down. And for many of us, we can actually say that was one of the best growth moments we've ever had because we had the courage to get back up. And right now, in many of our lives and in the world today, we're at a critical point. We're either going to get back up and play the game and play it full out, or we're just going to start going through the motions. And going through the motions sometimes feels easy. But you know that every bit, a little day, day after day after day, we're dying a little bit on the inside. Because we didn't come for that. So in this, she gives us 10 points. Now, you know, on a talk, I mostly give 3 points. I sometimes go to 5 points. I never go to 10 points. So hang on to your hats. We're doing 10 points. The first one, let's shoot the slide up there. The first one, if you are brave enough, often enough, you will fail. It is the physics of vulnerability. How many of us like that idea? How many think that if I'm a spiritual being, if I'm listening to God, I should never fail? Has that really worked for you? It doesn't work, right? It does not work. And I can show you why, right? Does this have any resemblance to your life sometimes? Right? This is the human condition. It is up and down, up and down, up and down, right? Now, the spiritual condition is the through line, right? Jesus said, in the world there's tribulation, but be of good cheer, for I've overcome the world, right? So the Spirit is this through line. The human experience is this, right? So why would we ever pray and meditate? We would pray and meditate that when we're in this, to remember this. But if I put you in a monastery or in a cave for 20 years and said all you got to do for the next 20 years is pray and meditate in a safe, secure environment where you wouldn't have your Uncle Harry at Christmas time, or you wouldn't have this problem or this challenge, you wouldn't have any of this. You would just have this. But you didn't come for just this. Because it's in this that we learn faith. Right? When you're here, it takes a great deal of faith to get back up. If we just live this over and over and over again, that we wouldn't build any sense of, we wouldn't learn forgiveness, we wouldn't learn faith, we wouldn't learn strength, we wouldn't learn how to overcome. That this is powerful. This is our true nature. But we came into life. Because in life, we also learn an aspect of God. We learn that we can get knocked down. And that we are greater than that. That we are greater than anything in our life. That in the world, there is stuff. There is tribulation. But be of good cheer, for I've learned to overcome it. And over again, what I want you to begin to see is we think this is the problem. And if we could just get this to be a straight line like that, then everything would be fabulous. But your soul actually needs the ups and downs to master faith. Because you need to master faith not only when everything's working, but also to master faith when it's not working. Because that's what builds our faith. That's what strengthens our faith muscle, is when we learn how to overcome life. When we're willing to get back up over and over again because we know the glory of God in us is greater than anything in the world. So I want you to take a deep breath. And I want you to say to yourself, I am greater than the ups and downs of my life. Together? I am greater than the ups and downs in my life. One more time. I am greater than the ups and downs in my life. 2, once we fail in service to being brave, we can never go back. This is so good. Right? Because the idea here is, right, that once you're in service to something greater than yourself, even if you fail, something inside of you is awakened, you know what, help me. Awakened, thank you. Awakened to something absolutely greater. Right? And what I want you to see is, if you go from living a black and white life to color, remember Wizard of Oz? When the first part, a little bit of the movie was black and white and then it went color. Once you've gone into Technicolor, you can't go back. right? You just can't go back to that little life. You can't go back to those little fears. You can't go back. So tonight, what I want you to see is that every time you show up brave, your life becomes richer. Every time you show up, even though you don't know what the outcome is going to be, you show up greater. Because that spirit becomes permanent in you. 3. The journey belongs to no one but you. However, no one does it alone. You know, in Joseph Campbell's work on the hero's journey, one of the things that he has defined in all literature is that when we look at mythology, the mythology of the hero, there's a moment where supernatural aid shows up, where assistance shows up. But it usually doesn't show up until after the hero has fallen, right? And I want you to see in your life that when you're playing it safe, you don't actually get all the assistance that is available to you until you go all the way and risk falling on your face, and then the supernatural aid comes to your aid. So how many remember in Cinderella, the fairy godmother? Right? Now, did Cinderella have everything she needed for the ball, right? She did. She actually did it all. She had it all tucked away. She thought she was going. And then the evil stepmother says, you're not going. And it crushes her. It disappoints her, frustrates her. And then who shows up? The fairy godmother. So what I want you to see is that the hero in you has to go as far as you can go based on your knowledge, your ability, what you know. And the moment you can't go any further, I promise God steps in to give you the piece that you're missing. I want to read from her work. Since the beginning of time, people have found a way to rise after falling. Yet no well-worn path leading that way. All must take their own way, exploring some of the most universal shared experience while also navigating the solitude that also makes us feel that we are in this, having to take one step at a time. So the deal is, 3, the journey belongs to no one but you. However, no one does it alone. 4, we are wired for story. In the culture of scarcity and imperfection, there's a surprising simple reason that we must to integrate, to share our stories of struggle. We do that because we feel the most alive when we are connected with others and being brave with our stories. How many of you have a friend or family member that's going through something? Anybody have somebody going through something? Now, when you watch them get up, are you inspired or not? Right? That we are wired for stories. And we are so connected on a spiritual level that every time you watch somebody get up, there's something in you that wants you to get up in a greater way. There's something about watching a story of somebody struggling and overcoming us that reminds us that there's a greater power in all of us. That we are wired for story. Right? Because how many times, if you see somebody who's struggling and you see how they're getting up and overcoming it, you think there would be a part of you that said, ooh, let's not do that. Let's not go there. But in reality, what it teaches us over and over again is that when we see somebody overcoming it, it inspires us for more. 5. Creativity embeds knowledge so that it can become practice. We move what we're learning from our heads to our hearts to our hands. How many of you have ever learned a new idea, concept, and wondered how to apply it? Have you ever thought, like, that's a great spiritual idea, but how do I really live that in my life, right? Because there is that struggle in us, right? And over again, what I want you to see is that it is through our creativity and bringing it into our daily practice that we actually learn to integrate the highest spiritual truth. How many of you have ever had to work at being positive? Right? Now, when you have to work at being positive, it's because for some of us, there's been a habit of negativity. Have you ever looked at the negative side of life and just chose to see the negative time over and over and over again? And then when you had this idea, maybe somebody showed it to you, that you could really be responsible for your perceptions, that you actually began to think, what if I saw this in a different way? What if I actually looked for a positive outcome? And then you actually have to practice it. Because that idea is life-changing, but only when you bring it into practice on a daily basis. So then you begin to practice it in your life. It becomes a daily activity. Like right here, right now, I can either think this is terrible, or I can actually be grateful. I could actually look for the good. I could actually look for a positive outcome. And the first time you do it, you think, wow, that really worked. And then you don't do it for like 10 other times, right? And then you think, oh yeah, that practice I wanted to do of actually learning to look for the positive, and then you do it again. You think, it worked again. And then you do it again and again and again, and then you begin to realize that your mindset has actually changed. That you're not seeing the world the way you used to see the world. That practice, that idea was actually translated from an idea in your head to your heart into a daily practice. And then once you had it as a practice, it became life-changing. Because an idea in and of itself isn't life-changing until it becomes integrated in your daily practice. Then it actually changes your life. How many of you have ever heard an idea, and it wasn't until years later that you actually began to practice it? Right? And you think, well, yeah, it seems true, right? But it has no real benefit. It doesn't make a difference until you actually bring it into practice. Number 6. Rising strong is the same process whether you're navigating your personal or professional lives. So, I have had opportunities to have personal and professional failures. Right? And there's a part of you from an executive professional place that wants to think that this is somehow different than personal. But the reality is, if you're honest with yourself, any failure is a punch in the gut. True? It's just a punch in the gut. And it takes a hit on our ego, it takes a hit on us, and there's a part of us that wants to think that either personally or professionally, it should be easier to take a hit. But is it? No. Because we integrate it the same way. You know, how many of you know that Don Miguel Ruiz says, don't take anything personally? How many of us take everything personally? You know, I get it as a concept. The practice of it is difficult because personally and professionally, where it lands in our heart and our soul is that we take it personally. So no matter where your greatest failure is, whether it's personally or professionally, getting off the mat after that experience is just as tough. Because there's a part of us that thinks, well, it's professional, it's not. But some of our greatest disappointments are professional. You know, and so whether you're getting up from a personal or a professional hit, what I want you to see is it's tough. It's tough. But learning the process learns to apply to both. So you can't take the learning in a professional environment and not also apply it in a personal situation. And you can't take a learning from a personal environment and not apply it to a professional, because that same power that allowed you to overcome allows you to overcome both 7. Is it up there? Can you see it? Comparative suffering is a function of fear and scarcity. Sorry. Have you ever wanted to compare your suffering to somebody else's suffering? Have you ever wanted to say, their suffering is not as great as my suffering? Or have you ever wanted to shame yourself that you've made your suffering not as great as maybe people starving or whatever? And what I want you to see is that our ego loves to compare suffering. We do. We love to compare suffering because either we want to feel like a bigger victim than everyone else, or we don't want to let ourselves feel how bad we feel at falling down. And what I want you to see, the moment you start comparing suffering, you're now outside of the game. Because you're not in your own experience. You're not in your own life. You're now paying attention to everybody else, and you're not really living the best version of you. That every time we want to say, well, I shouldn't really be feeling this way, or it really shouldn't hurt this bad, or I shouldn't really make such a big deal out of it. Or there are lots of people that have a lot tougher time than I'm having right now. What I want you to see is that every time you compare suffering, you're actually out of the game. The option, the choice, is to actually feel what you're feeling, to stay in your moment, to stay in your experience, because it's hard to give up, get in and get up when you're not engaged in yourself. 8. You cannot engineer an emotionally vulnerable and courageous process into an easy one-size-fits-all formula. What does that mean? Have you ever wanted somebody just to tell you how to do it? Right? Like, you know, like there's a part of us, right, that just wants somebody to tell us how to do it. And if somebody could give us the steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that apply universally to everybody, to every situation, living a spiritual life would be much easier. But part of learning to get up is learning how you have to give up. Get up. It's learning how you have to do it. That as you live your journey, as you live your process, you're going to learn what you need in life, how you want to be supported, how you want life to work for you. That it isn't one size fits all. It becomes very unique. And yes, there are themes, and yes, there are processes, but it's really about you and your process and your time. 9, courage is contagious. And we kind of spoke about that, and we just know that every time we watch somebody live courageously, we know that there's a greater experience. We know that it calls something forth in us that is greater. And 10, rising strong is a spiritual practice. Let me read from Brene Brown. Getting back on our feet is not required religious, theological, or doctrine. However, without the exception, the concept of spiritual emerges from the data as critically important to resilience and overcoming the struggle. I've crafted a definition of spirituality based on the data that I've collected over the past decade. Spirituality is the recognizing and celebrating that we are all intrinsically connected to one another by a power greater than ourselves, and that we are connected to a power and to one another is grounded in love, and that we belong. Practicing spirituality brings a sense of perspective, meaning, and purpose to our lives. Some of us call that power greater than ourselves God. Some do not. Some celebrate spirituality in churches or synagogues or mosques, and some do not. What I've come to understand is that we are all linked. We are all connected. So here's the deal. I want you to look, and this is your homework. I want you to look at somewhere in your life right now where you feel like you've taken a hit. Right? It can be personal, it can be professional, it doesn't matter. And I want you to really look at how you want to live this one. Because sometimes we don't want to take full responsibility for how we're living. Do you ever want to be just a big fat victim? Right? And that sometimes when we get knocked down, we don't really want to look at the process of how we're going to get back up. And what I want you to see tonight is that I promise that there's a presence and power of God in you that wants you to rise again. That didn't bring you in this world to take you out. That brought you into this world so that you could learn to be an overcomer. And that there is tribulation. There are ups and downs. That life is a cycle. And we love when we're going up, and we hate it when we're going down. But learning to have faith in the whole journey is what creates freedom. So I want everybody to look at one area in your life where you feel like you've been knocked down lately. And I want you to make an internal commitment on how you're going to live it. I want you to think about your rules of engagement. How are you going to live this one? Are you going to live it with faith? Are you going to ask for support? Are you going to ask for people to pray with you? Are you going to share it with people that can just love and support you right there? Or are you going to go isolate, turn within, and get depressed? Because we have a choice over and over again how we live this. And how we live this actually matters. It matters. Because we're here to demonstrate the glory of God. So I want you to write down your little project, whatever it is, and sometimes it doesn't feel little at all. And I want you to come up with at least 3 or 4 rules of engagement. How are you going to do it? How are you going to handle this situation so that you can become an overcomer in that area of your life? Are you willing? So for the next 4 weeks, that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about what it means to overcome. Let's pray. I invite you to open your mind, your heart, your soul to the activity of God that is within us and all around us. That we give thanks that there is one presence, one power, one God, one good right here, right now. And that's within us. And it is calling us out. Calling us to be more than we've ever been before. In the name and through the power of the living Christ, we give thanks. And so it is. Amen.